tired of losing my friends and my friends getting hurt. I don't know about you guys. I hope you got a lot of consideration for other competitors instead of a lot of balls and no brains. And I think I even go out on a limb and say that I think every damn body in this room is running a little bit scared. And I will tell you, my wife is running damn scared, and I think the rest of your wives and families are too. So use your damn heads, please.
The 1994 Daytona Speedweeks have been well documented, and many NASCAR fans know the story of this dreadful weekend. On the first day of practice, the legendary Neil Bonnett was killed in a crash. Just 3 short days later, 31-year-old Rodney Orr, who was attempting his first Winston Cup race, passed away in another practice session. Despite being remembered as one of the darkest weekends in the sport's history, the sport very nearly lost the life of another young racer. Ironically, it was because of Neil Bonnett that Andy Farr was able to walk away from one of the most vicious crashes ever at Daytona. Right before we get into the video, make sure you leave a like if you enjoy, it really helps me out a lot. Also, be sure to subscribe with notifications on so you never miss a video. Anyway, let's get right into it. Neil Bonnett was born on July 30th, 1946 in Hueytown, Alabama. He began his NASCAR career working on cars for Bobby Allison and was sort of a protege of the 1983 Cup champion. He grew close with the Allison family and eventually became part of the Alabama gang. Bonnett started racing at NASCAR's top level in 1974 and scored his first win in 1977 for Harry Hyde Jim Stacy Racing. Bonnett made the switch to race for the iconic Wood Brothers in 1979 and had great success with the number 21 team. Despite being very successful, Bonnett gained quite a unique reputation. He was respected for being a fierce and wildly quick racer, but he was also known for getting into serious crashes. On 4 separate occasions from 1986 to 1990, Bonnett would miss time for injuries sustained in crashes. Neil always claimed there was an art to crashing, something about getting the back end to hit first. But I don't know about that. It's not as if Bonnett's injuries occurred out of sight. They happened in front of 100,000 people at a time, said Bonnett's former crew chief, Butch Nelson. Buddy Baker provides some insight on Neil's driving style as well. Boy, Neil Bonnett was so talented, but he got hurt a bunch. Neil Bonnett ran wide open, half turned over all the time. In 1986 at Pocono, Neil Bonnett was involved in this big wreck. He had a heavy impact with the dirt embankment on the inside. The impact forced Bonnett to ride 100 feet or so on the driver's side door before he eventually landed back on all fours. After slowly getting out of his car, Neil collapsed to the ground before the safety crew could get to him. Just a couple of days later, Davey Allison took it up on himself to call car owner Junior Johnson to practice and qualify the number 12 in place of Bonnett the next week at Talladega. Johnson made the decision to let Allison drive, and once the doctors didn't clear Bonnett to race, Davey got to drive in the Talladega 500. Davey led several times en route to his first career top 10 finish. Anyway, getting back on track. In 1987, Bonnett suffered this single car wreck at Charlotte. The doctors said he wouldn't be able to get in the car for over a year. Since the Charlotte race was so late into the schedule, he only missed 3 races of the 87 season. Then, he raced in the Daytona 500 just a few months later, despite doctors saying he wouldn't be back in a car for a year. He also had a near-fatal and near-career-ending crash in 1990, but that's another story for another video. Now, this is the wreck I really want to talk about. In 1989, during the Peak Performance 500 at Dover, Neil had a big incident. He had a huge hit with the Turn 4 wall. Several other drivers piled into him, and it resulted in a red flag. Neil was hospitalized for 2 days for a broken sternum. After this incident, NASCAR got in contact with Neil about how to prevent an injury like this again. At the time, NASCAR's seatbelts had 2 shoulder straps that went over both shoulders and linked around the pelvis. As we know today, and Neil found out that day, this design isn't very good for protecting the chest. There's a lot of science that goes into this that I don't fully understand, but basically the lower body and shoulders are restrained back, but the head and chest would still move forward in an impact. We all know that the Hans device came in later to help with the head and neck restraint, but NASCAR was focused on protecting the sternum. Having the chest move forward while the rest of the body is held back is clearly not good because it makes the bones bend in ways that they're not supposed to, thus breaking the sternum in many crashes around this time. This ended up in NASCAR developing a belt that connected the shoulder straps at the chest as well as the pelvis. This allowed the chest to be restrained as well, so all over the pressure from a high-speed impact isn't isolated directly on the chest. This concept, known as the 5-point harness, wasn't anything extremely new, but it was modified to fit the needs of NASCAR competition. Regardless, this is where we take a few-year jump to 1994.
Andy Farr impacts the wall coming out of turn number 4.
On Thursday, February 10th, 1994, Andy Farr was attempting to qualify for his first ever ARCA race, their biggest race, the ARCA 200. He just lost the car in turn 4 and started to spin to the apron. He tried to catch it, but overcorrected way too much. This is where things turned very bad for Farr. As soon as his car started coming back on the racetrack, it started to flip and drilled the turn 4 wall. Upon impact, the entire front of his car came off. His car spun down to the apron and came to rest. Days later, Farr stated, "I didn't think the crash was that bad. I didn't even realize the car had turned over until I saw the replay on TV. When I crashed, I reached over and shut off the engine. It wasn't until later that I found out the engine wasn't even there." Not only did the flipping part of the wreck look scary, but the severity of the impact cannot be understated. The crash left a gaping hole from nearly top to bottom of a solid concrete wall and tore down nearly 75 feet of catch fencing as well. Farr's only injuries from the wreck: a broken sternum and a bruised heart. So this may sound like the 5-point harness didn't do its job, but it certainly did, and Farr recognized this. "Even though I busted my sternum, I couldn't imagine how bad it would have been if I didn't have that belt." I honestly think that Farr may have died that day without that safety belt. Farr was very grateful, of course, that he didn't die. The very next morning, he started to write a thank you note to Neil for his contribution to safety and saving his life. That was until he heard some devastating news. In another devastating, ironic twist, Neil Bonnett suffered an almost exact replica of Farr's crash. The only difference was that Bonnett hit slightly more head-on into the wall, just feet away from the place Farr impacted. Bonnett had to be cut from his car and was rushed to the medical center. NASCAR ordered that a tarp was to be placed over Bonnett's dismantled Chevrolet, which was a sign that something was definitely not okay. At 1:17, just about an hour after the wreck, Neil Bonnett was pronounced dead. Initially, rumors swirled around the garage that there was oil on the track going into turn 3, as there was a spill earlier that brought out the red flag. Oil dry powder was put down in turns 1 and 2, but some speculated that there was a smaller spill entering turn 3. NASCAR investigated, and there were no signs of a spillage. It was determined that Bonnett simply lost control. The day of Neil Bonnett's funeral, Rodney Orr was making a single-car run prepping for the Daytona 500. The 31-year-old was just coming off a championship season in the Goodies Dash Series and was looking to make his first ever start in the Cup Series. Orr started to spin, entering turn 1 at over 175 miles per hour. Just as Bonnett and Farr's fate, Orr's car swept from the apron up to the outside wall. Orr crashed very similar to Farr, except it was the roof of his car that collided with the catch fence. A piece of metal debris stabbed Orr through the chest, and his car flipped into the infield. Orr died because of blunt force trauma to the chest 30 minutes later. NASCAR officials were quick to blame Orr for the crash, but an investigation found that a mounting stud had failed, causing the car to lose control. All 3 drivers that suffered the same type of horrific crash were racing Hoosier tires. NASCAR amended its rules for obvious reasons, letting teams switch from Hoosiers to Goodyears for the running of the duels and the Daytona 500. Most drivers took advantage of the switch, although it's unclear if the tires actually had any part in these wrecks or if it was just a coincidence. We will probably never know at this point. Although we look back at the 1994 Speedweeks with heavy hearts, it is comforting to know that one tragedy was avoided and Andy Farr is still with us to this day. Neil Bonnett's legacy is forever held in the NASCAR record books, and it's also comforting that one of his last thoughts was knowing that his contribution to the sport had directly saved the life of a young racer. Rodney Orr will go in the history books as well for being a champion, and will be remembered as one of the great what-ifs in NASCAR history. Anyway guys, that was it for this video. I hope you did enjoy. If you did, make sure you leave a like, and subscribe so you never miss a video. That's all from me for today, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.